Okay, today I am joined by our commercial director, James Swallow. I thought we could talk today about Saudi Arabia because I feel like it's just absolutely booming across the GCC. Everyone's talking about Saudi. Um, let's start with how that has developed even over the last few years. Like, what is the difference between people talking about Saudi even 5 years ago versus today and the movements that we've seen in the last couple of years?
There's been a lot of reform, certainly in the way that companies can set up, but also, lifestyle generally. I mean, the Saudi government has changed its approach in terms of wanting to encourage much more development. Obviously, there's been some mega projects announced, and a lot of companies that are working there, particularly on construction, oil and gas. Those projects have increased substantially over that period of time. So there's been a kind of an economic drive, but also really a relaxation in some of the rules and the laws that we saw in terms of making it a more friendly environment to live and work.
Yeah.
So that's had a significant impact. In terms of setting up a company there, the investment authority used to be called SAGIO, is now called MISA, kind of reformed the company formation structure in Saudi to allow 100% foreign ownership.
Okay.
During that period, before the 5-year period you're talking about, and that kind of really made it a lot easier for companies to set up.
Yeah.
Although it was still at that time quite complicated, but now over time the process has really improved. The speed that companies can set up has improved. The speed that they can get people on the ground, get the license and bank account set up has improved considerably. So it's been a number of factors that has attributed to that growth in companies and growth in people that are moving to Saudi.
Okay, because I think in comparison, if you were to compare it to the UAE, it does have a bit of a reputation for being trickier to set up, to go there, the requirements. And I feel like a lot of that gets a bit lost because there's so many words that are used in Saudi specifically, MISA, Mudad, all these portal systems that kind of almost make it sound scarier than it is. Do you think that's the case? Does its reputation have grounds for being trickier, or?
Possibly. I mean, there's certainly when Dubai and the UAE embraced, Western companies coming in, really English became a very, very much, the dual language. We see a lot of English Arabic, even in the mainland here in the UAE. So still English Arabic, although the Arabic is the one that, in the end pervades. But in Saudi, it's very much, all these portals that you talk about are Arabic names. So coming from a Western approach with the English language, it can be a little bit overwhelming. But once you get into the detail, it's just a name that's otherwise fairly easy to get round. It has got, so to get a license through MISA, what also there isn't yet in Saudi are free zones.
Yeah.
So the UAE really, charged ahead with the creation of free zones, and that created a very easy platform for companies and individuals to come in quite easily. And that was championed by the government, and it's been very successful. In Saudi, they've announced 4 economic free zones, but still not kind of live.
Under development.
So you still are going through mainland, and you're still going through the kind of process that covers the whole of Saudi.
Yeah.
If you're a foreign-owned company, you go through MISA, and getting that license is pretty straightforward, although you do need at least a year of audited accounts showing profitability in that same industry. So there's a criteria there which immediately makes it, for example, an individual foreign national can't set up a company.
Yeah.
It has to go through a corporate entity. So immediately it makes it a little bit more difficult.
Okay.
But the MISA license itself is very easy and straightforward. If you meet all those criteria, easy to set up. What often happens is the post-incorporation registrations with all of those portals are still a little bit slow if you don't know what you're doing.
Yeah.
So if you have a particular activity that's regulated by a government body in Saudi Arabia, you're going to need to go and get a separate license after you get your MISA license.
Yeah.
And that is what can often slow things down.
Okay.
Then once you've set up the company, getting that registered with, essentially Labour and Immigration Department, again, that can be quite a long and onerous process if you don't know what you're doing. So that tends to be a stumbling block.
So with the audited accounts as kind of like a prerequisite, is there any kind of startup atmosphere more small, medium types of businesses in Saudi, or is it really only like the kind of major players, global companies that are looking at Saudi?
There are some incubators cropping up, and
Okay.
there are some incubator platforms. You can still set up companies, even if you're not turning over a significant amount of money, you can set up a kind of or you have a small business in another country or jurisdiction. You can use that.
Okay.
You're not talking about, you don't need mega millions to set up. So SMEs that have, let's say, an operating business in Dubai, can, providing they've got their year of accounts, go straight into Saudi using the MISA platform.
Okay, and then, but if you were starting as a new business, would you look at Saudi, or I guess maybe you'd start somewhere maybe a little bit softer like the UAE, and then expand into Saudi after that?
I think it's demand led. I mean, there's a lot of opportunity in Saudi Arabia, particularly with the demographic. There's a huge, I think it's something like 50% of the overall population below the age of 25.
Yeah, I've seen
so that means, and Saudi wants to drive that innovative culture within its own society.
Yeah.
And we're seeing a lot of SMEs that are Saudi owned, and that, as a Saudi owned entity, you don't have to go through MISA. You can set up a lot easier.
Yeah.
Or companies are partnering with Saudi individuals or with Saudi companies to kind of create that SME environment.
Yeah.
So there's definitely a lot of opportunity with the growth of those demographics in all areas.
Yeah.
As well as the big mega projects in construction, oil and gas, and everything else you're talking about. F&B or innovative tech, that kind of thing. Platforms that can be used to kind of drive and improve and make the economy more efficient.
Okay.
We're seeing a lot of that.
And then on the other side of that, the RHQ requirement obviously was announced, 2 years ago, less than. What kind of development have we seen there? How firmly are Saudi applying the RHQ requirement, regional headquarters?
Yeah, interesting question. When it was announced, there was a tight deadline and everyone was panicking.
Yeah.
What ends up happening is it's driven by a government project. So you are working with the government, you already have an existing project. There's a requirement, and that's what they're trying to do, to say to companies, okay, look, we're working on this project, but we're going to need you to form your regional headquarters here.
Yeah.
And that means to put 3 senior execs there, much larger office space, more substance, as well as other criteria. They softened that over the period of time in relation to demanding people to do it to hit deadlines, but it tended to be specific to each project.
Okay.
So if companies are working with Aramco, they chat to them and say, look, we can do this in time, and we've set up a plan to build an RHQ.
Yeah.
So you can kind of companies would undertake to have the RHQ in place by a year or 2 years or something like that, and that was acceptable for certain government entities. But also a lot of companies have chosen to go because it's important to them and it commercially makes sense.
Yeah.
So they've done it. So it's a bit of both. We've seen a mix of the two.
Yeah, and I mean, so there is people that are setting up their RHQs in Saudi. It wasn't just a statement that nobody kind of followed through with. Yeah.
And it's quite easy to do so. You have got to meet that criteria, but there's no magic wand needed. You just go, right, here's the criteria that I need to do to make it a regional headquarters.
Yeah.
And it does change the license, so it changes the status of the license, but it's still a limited liability company, for example, but it becomes an RHQ. It's kind of a tag on to that LLC.
Okay.
So it's not a structural change.
And what would you say? I mean, I think the assumption that Saudi will be the kind of UAE of the future, kind of following in the footsteps and kind of grow to that same. Do you think that that's accurate?
Well, it's interesting. I mean, we don't want to touch on, there is the rivalry, and that's partly the reason for the RHQ. They're like, hey, everyone's living and working in Dubai. Let's get some people over here, bringing revenue into the economy. So there's a bit of rivalry going on there behind the scenes.
Yeah.
I think that also the big issue that Saudi has with the RHQ is that they would have to bring senior execs there. Senior execs want their families to be there.
Yeah.
The schools, the infrastructure is not quite there. It's still, given the choice of whether you want to live and work and have a family here in the UAE, I think people are still saying that's a nicer place to live.
Yeah.
Because obviously what the UAE has done, worked very hard in that. Saudi wants to get there.
Yeah.
It will take time. So there's still that kind of hardship posting, in inverted commas, associated with Saudi. So we still see people living here, families here, schools here, and then
traveling for
the
work.
exec is the one in Saudi Arabia. That will change over time.
Yeah.
And Saudi, as I said, is working on that. Transport and infrastructure as well. We still see, events that we hold in Riyadh. If there's a big event and stuff, the traffic is very problematic, and that can be a big factor because it's very draining when your keynote speakers take 4 hours to get from the airport to the event. So they need to, and they're working on that. Obviously, the metro is slightly delayed, but that's coming online soon.
Improvements kind of
but yeah, I think obviously we don't see UAE demanding RHQs because they don't need to. That's what I'm saying is that they've done it by demand.
Do you think that the once the economic zones are kind of up and running, that that would probably see the next big push into Saudi, right? More options, more flexibility, more literally, essentially just more options for people to set up.
Yeah, I think so. Tax is a factor, remember. So Saudi has higher tax rates, higher corporation taxes, a withholding tax. There's no income tax, but there's a VAT, 15%. So if you're looking at, people still use the UAE free zones because it's a low tax jurisdiction, although there's 9% on corporate tax.
Yeah.
That doesn't apply if you're doing international business. It's only local business.
Yeah.
So you can still set up a tax-free, provided you sort out your tax, your economic substance requirements, which are the new requirements here, to make sure people are not channeling revenue into a zero tax or low tax jurisdiction without good cause. Then the UAE will still maintain itself, I think, in those terms.
Okay.
Saudi has a higher tax rate, has a higher social. There are more people in Saudi, more support required, higher taxes, which is understandable.
Yeah.
There's a higher Saudization requirement, but the Saudi population is very well educated. Finding people in that population to be your staff is much more relatively easier. But I think the economic zones will they will be specific and sector driven, but from what I can gather, particularly the financial free zone, that'll be interesting to see how that pans out, because that could be similar to DIFC and ADGM, a common law jurisdiction. So for asset structuring, for financially regulated companies and everything in the fintech industry, that'll be really interesting to see how that develops. I don't think there'll be a cheap and easy free zone, just stick up a tower and there's your free zone license, kind of in the way that the UAE did. I think it'll be more sector specific, with ecosystems in them, but there will be a driver to use those.
Yeah. Okay. And then one of the kind of visas that keep popping up at the moment is the Saudi temporary work visa. Does that kind of comment on the demand for people on the ground in Saudi? I know that, we've processed quite a lot of those visas in the last couple of months. Are they trying to get people on the ground to fulfill these projects?
I think so. Try and name an event that hasn't happened in Saudi recently in any sport, for example. So the short-term visas lend themselves very much for events and projects, for short-term projects. Obviously, you've got these mega projects. They're less useful in terms of those short-term mission visas or temporary work visas, because those they only allow one one entry, one exit. So it's really designed for max 3 months. I think it can be extended, but so it tends to be more events, less about an individual project necessarily, but we do see that for very short-term projects.
I guess that ties into the kind of network of news at the moment around the push for tourism and kind of Saudi's connections to other countries across the globe and trying to kind of drive that tourism. So that marries well with the temporary work visa and kind of events and all those kinds of things being driven in Saudi.
I think some of the European footballers that recently went to play in Saudi could probably just get temporary work visas for 3 months and then they leave.
So lots happening in Saudi. It's definitely one to keep an eye on, isn't it?
It is, very interesting. We're seeing huge demand.
Yeah.
What we end up seeing is a big demand for inquiries, but when it comes down to it, it's still more expensive to set up.
Yeah.
There are, as I said, higher taxes, so people need to have a look at the overall picture. It's not like an easy, quick setup. 1-2 weeks off we go. It's a big commitment and a big ongoing compliance commitment, tax commitment, to run and operate a business in Saudi. So make sure you get the right advice. Come and have a chat with our team. And we can help companies.
Great. Thank you very much.
Very good. Thank you, Bianca.